make an accusation, and she had been a known prostitute, working as a prostitute. So this, and again, this doesn't mean that he wasn't unstable, but the interesting thing, we don't know too much. He's a fairly shadowy figure in the sense of, and the couple of biographies and stuff that have been attempted to write and written on him don't seem to amount to too much, since there's not too much. Most of what we know about him is from people that were close to him, like Isherwood or reminiscences and memoirs. Neil emerges from this, though, totally reorganized and refocused with the idea of establishing this kind of fundamental principle in education. All right? He's not the only one. Bertrand Russell and his wife established a school similarly influenced by some of these ideas, a little bit more structured, a little bit more upper class, and a little bit more proper, with a better class of students, as Neil would always say. He would always say, Russell always gets the good students. We get the bottom of the barrel. Neil always complained that it wasn't a true test of his approach, because the students that he got were only the students where parents and institutions had come to the end of the road and felt there was no hope, and anything would be, just as long as they could get rid of them. So he usually was the dumping ground. So Neil emerges out of this, and by 1936, when he meets Reich, and we'll get to that in a minute, he has already become a famous, Summerhill has been established. Neil is primarily interested in and influenced not only by Lane, but very deeply invested in psychoanalysis, and is probably doing child analysis. It's a little unclear, a little vague exactly how and what he did as a child analyst, but clearly was doing some sort of psychoanalytic work, was somewhat influenced and had some contact with Anna Freud and others. But he was a central figure in the intellectual elite of England and Europe. Was also very involved with not only interested in Freud, but very involved with German intellectual trends, and had heard and was reading Reich by this time. And so, as the story goes, as Neil himself says, 1936, Reich is now in Oslo, in Scandinavia, and Neil is invited to Oslo to give a series of lectures. Reads Reich, spends his time reading Reich all the way over on the boat, and he gives a lecture to a not to a nice small group like this, but to a packed house, and is told just as he's starting the lecture that Wilhelm Reich is in the audience, which is like, I guess would be if, I don't know who walked in today, but someone that would give us a start. He finishes the lecture. Reich approaches him. Neil almost collapses. They spend the rest of the evening drinking and talking for hours and hours. Neil, cuts off his own therapy at that moment with the psychoanalyst he's been seeing, unknown to the psychoanalyst. Contacts Reich the next day and starts treatment, and spends a week in treatment with Reich, in which he feels that this is at the point that Reich is now doing vegetotherapy. At this point, he feels that he's gained more than he had gained ever or in any treatment. Has become starts what becomes a lifelong friendship until Reich's death, and to the very end, Neil remains deeply embedded and deeply connected to Reich's work, so much so that at one point when Summerhill was about to be published and Neil was asked to remove many of the reference to Reich, the original edition had numerous, it was really structured around Reich's ideas and work. Neil said he was going to pull the book from publication. It was only on the urging of Steig and a number of friends of Reich, since Reich was dead by that time, that Neil allowed it to be, as long as there was a statement in the beginning that said that Reich was an important figure, he allowed it to go through, and the rest is history. But Neil remained deeply, deeply indebted to Reich, deeply connected to Reich, and one of the few people that was able to stand up to Reich and be honest with Reich. So if you read the letters, while Reich emerges clearly as the more dominant and stronger and more emphatic of the two, Neil remains the constant honest responder with honest questions and without being intimidated at all by Reich. Reich sees Neil clearly both as a deep and loving and valued and even-handed and honest friend, which was unusual to find. But also, from a practical point of view, Neil had something that Reich didn't have, which is he had a laboratory. And he had an opportunity in the work of Neil to see how these ideas actually operated. And Summerhill really ran, and it runs to this day, on the principles of self-governance. Right? Everyone from the janitorial staff to the head of the school has a vote. They had 3-year-olds there, they had votes. You know, Neil was a sort of playful and sort of trickster-like figure from all accounts, and so he loved to organize the 5-year-olds, the youngest ones, the 3 to 5-year-olds, in rebellions. So, because there were meetings in which decisions would be made, and if you got enough votes, anything could be imposed. You know, so he loved to get the 3 to 5-year-olds to vote things in that would embarrass the older kids. You know, I'm getting the high side. So for Reich, this was a chance to see how these principles actually play. And what you get in the letters is constant information, particularly during this time, to Reich of what's going on not only with their own kids, but with the kids that Neil is working with. And Reich is able to ask questions, present ideas, suggest ideas for Neil to examine or explore or look for, and he does. So just to finish up, I'll finish up with a quote, and also just a reminder that one of Neil's books after Summerhill, in answer to the problems that this issue of self-regulation raises, is a book called Freedom, Not License. And so one of the fundamental issues that Neil addresses, and Reich always addresses, is that when they're talking about self-regulation or freedom, right, they don't mean license. In America, it tended to be, and in American progressive education, particularly in radical education, it often became, particularly in the 60s, a thing of license. Do your own thing, baby. You know, like, you know, let it go. You know, the kid knows best. You know, so just in quick anecdotal fashion, the typical example Neil would give is that of the little boy who loved to play his tin drum, and he would insist on playing it in Neil's office when Neil was trying to work. And Neil kept saying, "You can't do that. I'm trying to work, and you can't do it where other people are trying to work. That's not fair." You know. And the kid would say, "But Neil, you said that we can do whatever we want to do, and I can play my drum." And he said, "You can play a drum, but not where it's interfering with other people." And the kid just kept banging away. So Neil kept saying, "If you keep doing that, I'm going to take your drum and put it up in a tree where you can't get it." You know. And finally, Neil took the drum and hung it up on a high, climbed up the tree himself and hung it up there. And the kid kept saying, "You know, you can't do that." He said, "I can. You're not being fair. When you're ready to play it someplace where it's not going to bother anybody, or where people are fine with it, you can do it." And it got worked out, and the kid eventually became a drummer. So keeping that in mind, freedom, not license. And finally, this statement from Summerhill by Neil. All right. Self-regulation implies a belief in human nature, a belief that there is not and never was original sin. Self-regulation means the right of a baby to live freely without outside authority. It means the baby feeds when it is hungry, that it becomes clean in habits only when it wants to, and that it is never stormed nor spanked, that it shall always be loved and protected. Of course, self-regulation, like any theoretical idea, is dangerous if not combined with common sense. And that's the last statement, the common sense. As Dr. Sobel used to like to say, yeah, that's fine, but as he pointed out to me when my daughter was born and we were also making plans to get new rugs for the house, he looked at me and said, "What are you, an idiot? You're going to have a new baby who you're going to let go run free around the house and you're going to get new rugs?" You know, I said, "Oh, right." So is it common sense? Okay. All right. So any questions, or do we have? Is there? You
have about 12 minutes.
Okay.
Keep your answers short. So we can
Okay. Yeah. Right. Thank you for reminding me.
So I'm listening. I'm